It's the inaugural record release from Discograffiti. Metal Machine Muzak is a slanted tribute to Lou Reed's divisive 1975 double LP Metal Machine Music. Lester Bangs called it the greatest album ever made, but no matter how it hits you, it's always been the ultimate music freak secret handshake. My ambient reimagining features 4 16-minute, 1-second tracks, just like the original, and each one was created by a top-shelf indie rock visionary. Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh, Corey Hansen from Wand, W. Cullen Hart from the Olivia Tremor Control, and Mark Robinson from Unrest. That's right, not a slouch in the bunch, unlike 99% of the compilations you've ever begrudgingly purchased for the one and only band on it you just had to hear. Metal Machine Muzak will not be available on streaming. The digital version is finally available for purchase, and the vinyl will be shipped this summer. Pre-orders for the LPs are available now, but they're going fast. They're being produced in a very limited edition run of 300 numbered 180-gram metallic silver double LP gatefold copies, only 100 of which can be ordered online. These copies will be numbered from 1 to 100, and they're first come, first served. To order either the digital or the vinyl, just head over to patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Don't miss out on Metal Machine Muzak, the ambient experience designed to make Brian Eno run screaming. What was it that inspired you with Hold Me Now? Because not just the lyrics, but the changes in that song, I cannot hear it to this day as a 52-year-old man and not get choked up by this song. Are you an emotional guy?
Apparently, yes. I'm an emotional guy. And okay, so the thing about Hold Me Now is that it actually came from a real life experience.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the music obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, David-Gebroe, and with 3 to 4 episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. I support a wife and a 5-year-old son with Discograffiti as my sole source of income. So if you love the show and this episode, please Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe. That's Gebroe. My guess is you probably stuff $1 into a tip jar when you buy a muffin. Please then, gauge the worth of this podcast side by side with simply being handed a muffin. My family and I thank you. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Thompson Twins. Psst. Along with our special guest, their lead singer and songwriter, Tom Bailey. No ratings this time out, just a brief, hard-hitting, career-spanning interview. And here's just some of the many things we touch on in this podcast. The Thompson Twins' barely known origins as a 7-person post-punk outfit that played thoroughly unhinged live shows, how their first huge hit wound up making more than half of the band's members redundant, and the incredible ad hoc superstar version of the band that was assembled to play a one-off performance at Live Aid. If you're a Thompson Twins superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the ultimate major cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features plenty of essential material, including overviews of entire releases that we had to cut for time. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. Longer cuts are on the Lieutenant tier, and our longest ultimate cuts, they're on the Major tier. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. Coming up, We've got Tom Morello rating the MC5, Michael Imperioli rating his favorite band, The Smiths, Robert Schneider rating the Strawberry Alarm Clock, and a massive, many-guested launch into the Beach Boys' entire catalog. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! During an age of candy-colored visuals and surface-level production gimmickry, today's guest whipped your host into states of stunned emotional catharsis with his band's blend of open-hearted yearning and gospel-infused largesse. While much of the music of the 1980s spills gleefully and unapologetically into guilty pleasure territory, his work has always sat just to the left of all of that for me. Unmistakably part of an era, yet strangely moving and transcending its timeness. Lads and ladies who dove headfirst into the gap 40 years ago with nary a second thought, it's one of a duo who were truly a trio, and lest we forget they were once two a septet. I love them and you do too, so how about we lean over that cake and give them a kiss for one last taste of that Jake Ryan bliss. It's the Thompson Twins, Tom Bailey.
Wow. Incredible. That's amazing. And some of it, I have to say, rings true. And the rest of it, I'll have to listen to again just to check through everything you said. But that's very, very nice intro.
Any falsehoods there?
Not that I spotted. No. It all kind of seems true to me. I like the way you position us slightly left of center there.
Well, it always struck me that way because when Into the Gap came out, I was 12 years old. And still, at that point, I was obsessively listening to music. And I had a yellow sports Walkman. It was waterproof. And I remember listening before I could really verbalize what it was that separated you or made you different. There was something that was emotionally honest about your work that I could tell. The production signifiers and all the candy that was sprinkled on top of the music then, it was just playing dress up, but that the center of all that stuff, there were truisms there that I wasn't finding in a lot of the music at the time.
Well, that's really interesting because, I mean, for a start, it describes very accurately the truth of our journey from being an underground, almost a revolutionarily underground band towards kind of mainstream pop music, which we decided we wanted to make at some stage. But we carried with us this kind of burden of responsibility to use music to make the world a better place, basically. That was the great kind of ambition of rock and roll in those days.
The crazy thing about you guys, and to be quite frank with you, I didn't know the very early days of the Thompson Twins, because this is, as anyone who's an avid listener of this show knows, we typically don't do just a straight interview. Typically, we march chronologically through an artist's career and give star ratings to everything they've ever done. This particular interview will be no star ratings, yet everything was compulsively listened to, everything you ever released, and I researched it all like a crazy person, but we will be moving chronologically through your career in tribute to the nature of time itself. And so when I allude to Jake Ryan in the intro, Jake Ryan, of course, I'm alluding to the character in 16 Candles. Talk about iconic. This is the unapproachable boy for all the girls out there who were kind of gawky and nerdy at that time. But as I'm researching all this stuff, I'm thinking, I wonder if you, at that point in the game, you're only a few years removed from being this underground, kind of revolutionary, we'll talk about your live shows and what those were like in the early days, kind of batshit crazy. And then you're kind of stapled to this cultural event, which seems to me like it has absolutely nothing to do with who you are.
Well, you're right, because the decision was in no way ours. I remember getting some kind of phone call saying they want to use one of your songs in a film, and I just kind of said, well, that's all right. And to this day, I've never seen the movie, which is a kind of weird thing. I've seen the actual scene that it's used in because it endlessly pops up on YouTube and what have you.
Why have you not seen 16 Candles?
I never had the opportunity. I never really chased it up. But for some reason, that's the way. I mean, it's just one of those weird twists of life. I think I've even met quite a few of the people that were involved in the film, but I never actually saw it.
It is a great film. I mean, it truly is a remarkable movie, but, revolutionary, not quite. It's very much a part of pop culture.
Especially in the States, I have to say. I mean, maybe that's another reason I haven't seen the movie is that I'm English, and it wasn't really a big deal in the UK. Some people would have sorted it out, but it didn't hit the nerve of UK teens at the time the way that it absolutely did in America, So, and that has an effect on my choice of song. If I'm playing in the UK, I often don't include that song. If I play in America, I have to include it.
There'll be a riot if you don't include that song, probably. So let's introduce the characters in today's episode. There are others who we may or may not get around to talking about, but we'll be talking about you, of course, Tom Bailey on bass, guitar, keyboards, and vocals, Joe Leeway, congas, percussion, keyboards, and vocals, and Alana Curry on drums, percussion, and vocals. That's the classic trio. And the funny thing is, I remember, of course, I was a little kid at the time, people joking around about, don't they know that there's 3 people in the group and they call themselves twins? And not knowing that at one point there were 7 people in the band.
That's right.
So at first, you guys were a spiky and angular post-punk new wave group, but you wound up, and we'll talk about the transformation, but wound up jumping ship to a more mainstream pop sound and achieved massive popularity. Specifically, early to mid 1980s, you guys were a juggernaut. You had a bucket load of hits in the UK, the US, and elsewhere. So you guys formed in 1977 in Sheffield, and your name was based on Thompson and Thompson, the 2 bumbling detectives in The Adventures of Tintin, right?
That's right. I guess the thing about the 2 detectives was that they were pretty useless at their job. They couldn't get it right, except accidentally. They always got it right. For some reason, they just landed on the truth of the situation without even realizing it. And that, for me, was a metaphor of how we were as musicians in the early days. So it seemed to be good. We improvised, and we kind of jammed away until something happened, and we went, oh, that sounds pretty good. So it was a kind of a fairly hit and miss approach to making music, and the name stuck.
So was it from the punk school of 3 chords and the truth? We don't really need to know music to actually make music. Because I will say, from your first single, from Squares and Triangles, you guys don't sound like a bunch of stumble bums. You sound like you know what you're doing.
Well, there's an element of both. I think the punk thing gave us a kind of weird permission to go ahead and do it, because up until that point, you already had to be in a kind of privileged position, I suppose, to make your first move. And suddenly punk said, anyone can do this. You don't even have to know very much, So that opened a door which we ran through, carrying whatever musical knowledge we had. And everyone else in the band was enthusiastic amateur musician, but for one reason or another, I'd had musical training. I'd done the whole childhood music training, and I'd been to college and studied music and stuff. So I wasn't just going through with kind of unsophisticated ideas. In fact, the problem was more or less the other way around. To keep it simple and not let it become too complex was more of a job.
Well, I think the sign of youth is the busyness, or the kind of cluttered unfussiness of just letting everything out there. You want to show how impressive you are. You want to impress people. So all your ideas are out there at once. And so your early material, and this is not in any way a denigration, because I actually wish there was a lot more of the type of material that was on your debut, a product of, from 1981. It's very busy and very exciting, and much more of, to be reductive, an African forward sort of a feel to it. And then also your live performances at the time, although I haven't seen footage, you would encourage audience members to join you guys and pound along on makeshift percussion objects.
Yeah, there was always a kind of frenzied end to our concerts in those days where people actually joined in. We would hand out percussion instruments. We became so short of instruments in the end that we had to buy hubcaps from demolition yards and use those as kind of makeshift cowbells and things.
I kind of picture you going to bed at night and thinking of the roads not taken, of the hubcap parties that you used to have, and what was lost by not following up, those types of whims. Is there an element to that for you, or no?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to characterize that era, except that that band was brilliant. And I have to say, some of the concerts they did are still seared into my memory as being just, the best. But it wasn't very focused on success, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It couldn't intend to make a hit or see one coming. It was just what it was, and it did what it did, and everyone had great fun.
Not only wasn't it focused on success, but you were squatters at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, it was a kind of survival context.
You were very ambitious homeless people, right?
I guess you could look at it that way. I mean, we lived for what we did and had very little reward other than the emotional satisfaction of it all.
So at this early stage, and even venturing toward 1982's Set LP, Alana's not part of the band yet, but she was thanked. So she was kind of on the periphery. Is that what the situation was?
She had joined us on a tour, and she played this kind of anarchistic and completely unskilled saxophone. And she subsequently rejoined us and became, a little bit of percussion, a little bit of backing vocals. And being a creative person, she wanted to get more and more involved in the writing of things.
And then Matthew Seligman comes in on bass guitar, which frees you up to become a full frontman, even though...
That's right. We realized, that was one of the... it's so obvious, isn't it, thinking back? But we realized at some point that it was important to have a front person who actually concentrated on that rather than taking turns and the focus wandering away.
You were almost more adequately described as a collective.
Yes, because it was just a bunch of friends doing that thing. It was almost like a hobby that became serious.
And then something unexpected happened. You wrote In the Name of Love, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you wrote it as almost like something to fill the album out with. You didn't write it as a phrase, right?
That's absolutely right. I'd just gotten a hold of a keyboard synthesizer, and there was a drum machine in the studio we were using. So when we didn't have enough tracks for the album, I said, okay, I'm going to do something to fill out the album, as you say. And I wrote it very, very quickly. In one night, came into the studio on the next day, gave everyone their parts, and we kind of finished it super quickly. And it was, to an extent, embarrassing that it became the hit of the album. And that, for me, became the writing on the wall. I knew that I wanted to pursue this way of working with synthesizers and drum machines.
But yet it was embarrassing. So, there's an element, and I see it in so many different careers, like Sly and the Family Stone. Their first album is very complex, and they kind of streamlined the sound and then created dance to the music. And then he felt like he had, in a sense, in his own way, sold out. I'm not saying that you did.
I meant that it was embarrassing in the sense that the rest of the group had very little part to play, because suddenly, I was writing all the parts with a keyboard, basically with a synthesizer. And I had to kind of translate those into parts for the band to play, but it wasn't really meant to be that way. It was just, it had more of a synthetic sound. And that fascinated me, but I didn't need a band to do it anymore.
Right. So actually, the success of that song is what wound up bringing what was aptly described as a collective down to a trio.
That's right.
It was just extraneous to have all those people involved, right?
That's right. And we went and toured that album, and more it became obvious that that was the direction we had to go in, or at least I had to go in. And of course, everyone else was not very keen on that idea because it kind of made them redundant. Apart from Joe and Alana, who were probably the least skilled musicians, but the most enthusiastic for this new way of doing things. And so it became obvious that the 7-piece had to come to an end.
Hi, I'm Dave-Gebroe. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 4-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate podcast for music obsessives thrive. Now I need your help. Although Discograffiti is rated in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, the economics of this thing are tricky. Becoming a member of Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to over 100 more exclusive episodes. episodes. And moving forward now every Sunday for only $5 a month as a private first class, you get our new weekly show by and for Discograffiti's Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a lieutenant, you get an ad-free, substantially elongated director's cut of every episode. And you'll be getting the shows a few days earlier than the general populace, which is designed to make you feel even more special than you already are. So when you become a major, you'll be getting access to the ultimate director's cuts of all our sprawling, super deep dive episodes. As far as I'm concerned, these super cuts have absolutely everything that was meant to be heard. Plus, you get yours before the lieutenants get theirs. But that ain't it. You also get all our other series, like Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and exclusive limited series like The Private Press with Paul Major. And if you've got no financial worries to speak of, keep in mind that some of the higher Patreon tiers allow you to actually advertise on the show, choose the bands we cover, or even some of the guests we get. For the price of a cup of coffee a week, you can ensure my family's fed, build a music library that'll be the envy of your block, and connect to a thriving community of music maniacs all at the same time. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Once again, that's Patreon.com/Discograffiti. So, In the Name of Love is kind of tossed off. In other words, it's very simple for you to write a song like that, and is number one on the dance charts for 5 weeks. That's the U.S. From May 22nd to June 19th in 1982. And so how do you wind up following up with material that's written so quickly, so easily? Is it a mind game to put your heart and soul into a type of music that people aren't really paying attention to, and then something that's just, you do it in however much time it took? Is it, in a way, almost more difficult to write in that style then?
No, I mean, I think what happened was there was a kind of backlog of ideas that were inappropriate for the 7-piece band that I suddenly thought, you know what? There's all these things I've been unable to do because it didn't fit them, and now I can do them. And Alana started writing lyrics. I was pumping music out like I was just a machine myself, It was very strange, very productive. And there was also a kind of shift away from having to pretend that we were super serious about it. There was a playfulness came back into the Thompson Twins at that point, which I think is one of our enduring signatures. There's emotional depth and we're absolutely serious about what we do, but there's something, playful about it too, which surfaces in different amounts from time to time. But it's certainly present on that album where the three of us first worked together and made Sidekicks.
Right. So Quick Step and Sidekick, as it's known in the UK, 1983. Let's talk about how important Alex Sadkin is to the band's success. You just started working with him here, right?
Yeah, we were searching around for a suitable producer, and I'd seen his name on Bob Marley records and Grace Jones records on Third World records. So I was a really big reggae fan, and that made a lot of sense to me.
And by the way, your early dub remixes are incredible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Not everyone knows that side of me, but there you go. But I remember him saying there's only one problem. He doesn't work in the UK. You have to go to the Bahamas. Like, how big a problem is that, guys? So then we jump on a plane, and we went there with 4 songs, to try out working with him. And it went so well, basically, that we carried on doing the rest of the album. And at that point, Joe was into designing live ideas, and Alana was thinking about the visual presentation of the record and things like that. And myself and Alex carried on working to complete it. And that helped me to realize what I eventually came to realize was the biggest change in my approach to making records, which is we were no longer a band. We were the designers of pop music. So there were no assumptions. There didn't need to be a drum kit if you didn't want one. We just went ahead and made ideas which were suitable for records. And Alex certainly helped us in that process.
You've worked with a number of impressive producers, but to me, he's your George Martin in the sense that there was certainly a shift, a marked departure, and a sort of takeoff point at that moment, but there was not a hard break with the past. When I listen to Quick Step and Sidekick, I'm not hearing a band that's completely removed from a product of and some of the early material. I still hear that same band in there, but there's refinement. The thing that leaps out as the biggest difference is the space in the mix.
Well, I wouldn't have seen it that way at all, but you're probably quite right. I mean, I feel the continuity because I was in every version of the band, right?
Yeah.
But other people look for elements in the output and what it actually sounds like.
It's poppier. I mean, it's certainly poppier. And, there's more of an emphasis on that very distinctively rubbery bass line. And the lush 80s production is fully in place by this point. Certainly in the U.S., the Thompson Twins that everyone I know came to know and love kind of starts here.
Right, yeah. And to an extent, the time was that we were still pretty cutting edge then. Not everyone in America accepted that way of making music. And there were some radio stations that said, no way, we're not having this crazy English rubbish, Where's the guitars, man? So you're always kind of constrained, but fighting against the cultural context like that. It was very exciting to be part of what people considered to be a new wave of music.
And then comes Into the Gap in 1984. Just in terms of the timeline, that's where I came on board initially. And this, to date, is your most commercially successful studio album. It peaked at #1 in the UK album chart for 3 weeks, #10 in the US, and it was just filled with successful singles. Plus, I have to say, all the deep cuts on it are incredible. The way it closes with Storm on the Sea and Who Can Stop the Rain, really beautiful. It hangs together in a very solid way as a record experience where a lot of the stuff from that time period feels like a collection of tracks or potential music videos, etc. It really is a fantastic album. And still to this day, I don't know what it was. What was it that inspired you with Hold Me Now? Because not just the lyrics, but the changes in that song, I cannot hear it to this day as a 52-year-old man and not get choked up by this song. Are you an emotional guy?
Apparently, yes. I'm an emotional guy. And okay, so the thing about Hold Me Now is that it actually came from a real life experience of Alana and I falling out big time and then kind of making friends again. So we ended up writing a song about the very real decision to compromise, put our egos to one side and be good to each other, which I think is a worthwhile topic for a song.
And of course, for those who don't know, she came on board as your girlfriend. And at the time, she still is your girlfriend, right?
That's right, yeah. So we wrote that song very easily as a result of that experience. And interestingly, we decided, because Alex was tied up with some other project and we wanted to get on with making the album, we went and had recorded Hold Me Now first in London. We didn't go back to the Bahamas yet. So we finished it. He turned up and helped with the vocal recording, I think, but the rest of it I did on my own first. And then we stuck it out. We released it and went to the Bahamas to start making the rest of the album. Then we started getting phone calls. This is before the internet, right? So we had no idea what was going on, but phone calls started coming in. Man, it's going up the charts here, it's going up the charts there. We had very exciting reports from around the world.
As a single, as a lead single.
As a single, yeah. So the lead single from an album we hadn't yet made was charting everywhere, which is the most incredibly exciting thing. And it put a lot of pressure on us to make sure that the album was going to be as amazing as it could be. And we took that pressure on board willingly. We knew we had 2 or 3 other potential hit songs. So once we kind of nailed those as well, the Doctor, Doctor, You Take Me Up, Sister of Mercy, we said that now gives us permission to stop worrying about chart positions and just make songs, just make music, have fun, be a little bit more left of center as well. And for once, that plan just played out as if it was meant to be. So Into the Gap it was 40 years almost to the day that it was released. A couple of months ago was for the 40th anniversary. And yeah, I still remember it as the easiest album to make.
That's interesting. It's always the easy ones where it kind of falls out of you, where people connect. Somehow that is always the case.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. When it's labored over, people can hear that. People can hear too much effort.
That's right. You go too far trying to fix things.
Right. Fix it in post. But I mean, I can't think of a song that would be so obviously a hit before you unleash it into the world as something like that. You must have known when you first heard the playback of Hold Me Now in the studio, we have a monster in our hands right here.
Yes, as we were recording it, in fact, I thought this is fantastic. And I just kept adding and adding more of the parts that I wanted to, and it became this kind of unstoppable idea.
And this is when you guys, I mean, you could not turn in any direction and not be seeing or hearing you guys. So February 84 is when Into the Gap comes out. May 84 is when 16 Candles is released. And If You Were Here soundtracks the end of that scene, and probably the most iconic moment in 1980s cinema in the US. So you're swept into an iconic groundswell that may or may not have had anything to do with what it was you felt you embodied as a group. So since we're on the topic, what did you feel that you embodied as a group? And did you feel like people were actually getting what you were putting out there, or only a slice of it?
Well, I mean, some of what we embodied as a group was actually non-musical, right? Because we'd started out as four white guys with guitars, and we ended up with black, white, male, female three-piece called Twins. You know, the whole thing sort of subverted the assumption of what a pop group should look like. And that was something we carried, and we started to notice that there was a big mainstream audience, but it carried along this audience of misfits, people who didn't feel like they fitted in with the assumptions of, you know, social norms and so on and so forth. So to this day, I feel that the Thompson Twins offered a home for the alternative way of doing things in its audience as well as its music.
You're at Live Aid. You perform Hold Me Now and Revolution. You guys are monstrously successful at this point. And your mullet, by the way, had achieved full flight.
I saw a photograph of it in a kind of coffee table book called Hairstyles of the Gods. So we were laughing about that. But anyway, yes, by that point, we were working with Nile Rodgers in New York, and we'd kind of reconvened as a three-piece to try and finish his To Future Days with Nile on board as producer. And then the whole Live Aid thing came up, and we thought, oh, gosh, we've got to go back to the UK, but we're right in the middle of an album. Why don't we play in Philadelphia if they'll invite us to do that instead? The Live Aid organization agreed, but we had no local live band. So then we had to quickly search around. Niall had this great idea that the David Letterman band were without a gig that night because the Letterman show was being taken over by the Live Aid broadcast. So we got them, and Steve Stevens from Billy Idol's band had already played a bit on the record. So I called him. He wanted to do it. Niall had just made an album with Madonna. So we did a kind of backstage deal to sing backing vocals on each other's sets. And so, but almost by accident, we ended up with this superstar band with Niall on guitar as well.
Here's To Future Days, another really good record. Great deep cuts like I Love You Killed the Clown. And of course, Lay Your Hands on Me and King for a Day are monstrous. And then comes a turning point where you guys took a break in 1986. Joe left the band. What happened with Joe leaving? Was that a mutual decision, or?
I think he'd become less involved in the creative process of the group and was turning up less and less for writing sessions and things like that. We even started living in different countries, so that was one of the reasons. And then at the end of, I think, a Japanese tour, we felt that it was coming to an end with him, and we said, see you later kind of thing. And he knew he wanted to take a break and do something else.
Preceding Alana and yourself getting your house in Ireland, you lost a child, you had a miscarriage, and she lost her mother. So my guess is that it was kind of after all this fame, you kind of retreated and took care of yourselves for a little while.
Yes, because, being in a successful pop group is a dream come true, isn't it? There's something fabulous and fantastic about all of that. And then life turns around and reality bites sometimes, You have to say, hang on a minute, this is not about preening yourself in front of a camera or making the next gig or something. This is about the harsh realities of life sometimes that you have to deal with. It's important not to make too much of a deal about that because, as you say, a lot of us go through those things. It's harsh and it's part of life.
And I know that preceding your work on the 1987 record, Close to the Bone, you had reunited with your parents. Do you mind me asking, over 10 years previous, you had a falling out with them. Can I ask what over and, what led to the reparations, thank God, between your mom and dad?
I'm never quite sure what kicked all that off, but we became distant and unfriendly towards each other, and probably stupidly. And it might have been just a generation gap thing, where parents are too proud to be unconditional in their approval, And anyway, I was very busy and being very successful, so I didn't have time to hang around and deal with that at the time. And so it was actually 7 years of lack of contact. And then I think Alana invited them to a concert.
Did she tell you about it beforehand or not?
No, I didn't find out they were there until after the encore.
What was it like? Was it immediate that you mended bridges?
Yes, yeah. It was magical and amazing and very, very good. And I'm so pleased because shortly after that, my mother became ill with a chronic and long-term degenerative disease. So she went downhill over several years, but I was very pleased to make friends again before all that happened. And same with my father, with whom I had, a difficult relationship earlier in life. We eventually reconciled. We just kind of got off our soapboxes about our way of doing things and agreed that we were just father and son.
It's amazing. I followed an artistic path from early on. There must be some unwritten code where, first of all, that's part of the code is that there has to be that gap. Like some of the artists in the 60s, like Dylan and Jim Morrison saying they didn't even have parents or they had passed away, and then realizing later in life, inevitably, that that's completely superfluous. It has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah. And I suppose as a parent yourself, you'll know that, we tend to be so concerned about our children that there's a tendency to be conservative about their security and their safety and all of those kind of things, where they want to be wild and free. And we're thinking, no, go out and get a proper job.
Yeah.
Which is what my mother used to say to me, when I'm kind of riding up the charts. She said, when are you going to get a proper job? So it's a kind of funny thing.
Thank God then for the legacy of Alana and what she brought to you and your parents. So with the experiences that you went through with your parents and then with the tragedy of your unborn child and her mom's passing, it's difficult for music then to truly have the capacity to deal with and heal trauma that's that intense. Do you feel like Close to the Bone did that, or do you feel like it missed the mark artistically for you?
Music as a gift is actually a great tool for overcoming tragedy and somehow processing the necessary emotions of such situations. Whether it does it adequately, who can say? But at least it's a tool. There are some things that in life that can only be expressed poetically or musically, So I think we're lucky to be in that business to begin with. But yeah, there is no complete answer to the tragedies of life.
And then commercially, your road started changing. The record was not the success that your past records were. Of course, you were aiming for something different. When I hear Close to the Bone, I don't hear a band that is anti-commercial in the way that, maybe a Product of was back at the beginning of the decade. But I don't hear a band trying to do Dr. Doctor either. So was that difficult to contend with the changing times and the fickle nature of fame?
It's possible that we'd done big success for long enough. It'd be nice to have a slightly different trajectory here. But also, I think the personal events of our lives meant that we were less playful about what we were doing. I mean, Close to the Bone sounds like a more serious record to me. It didn't have the same amount of bounce in it that the previous ones did. So many times when I'm thinking about these things and people ask me questions, the honest answer is one thing leads to another. You know?
Yeah.
There's no great plan. There's no great compensation going on all the time. It's like you get up in the morning still wanting to make music, but your ideas have changed a little bit. We decided that the touring had to stop for a while we were raising kids. It was not so easy to do. And it was also, coincidentally, very much the era of video. Alana had become fascinated by video as the way of performing her ideas rather than being on a stage. And she started to direct our videos. And I think the desire to go out on the road and perform it had left. I was slightly resentful of that, but I went along with it because we were in it together, so to speak. And ever since that time, I took a long break from those performances. But I missed it.
And that was actually Close to the Bone was the last Thompson Twins record promoted by a tour.
That's right. Yeah.
Interestingly, because you never know how the music industry is going to wiggle one way or the other. But after what really comparatively was not a success, Warner Brothers approached you. And in the words of Alana, Warner Brothers came to us and said, here's a pile of money. Go make the sort of record you really want to make, which is every musician's dream. So you made Big Trash.
Yeah, which was very much back to being a kind of crazy pop record again. It's true. I remember people thinking, wow, it's a pop record. Never expected that because they thought we were really going into a less kind of mainstream appeal area. But it still has a lot of kind of challenging ideas now that I think of it. Some people find that that's their favorite album of ours.
What's your favorite album of yours?
I don't want to pin them down too much, but Into the Gap was the easiest, where it all came together. There was one also very similar to that. It was after we quit the Twins and formed Babel. The first Babel album just flowed out of me like...
The Stone?
I can't explain why that was so easy to make. We had a vision that just drove us forward to do that. Every decision had to fit in with that vision.
So The Stone, is that your favorite record that you've made?
I can't say it's my favorite, but those two stand out as being the purest form of expression, making it all the way into the grooves of the record.
And then from the files of, what a shame this didn't actually work out the way it was intended. In 1991, when you released Queer, you tried to posit this as a sort of white label thing where you tried to erase the fact that it was a Thompson Twins thing and just release these, white label dance things, which would have been incredible if it had actually worked out as intended, because Come Inside, that should have been a hit.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's
a bigger
great
hit, I should say. Looking back, what really boiled down is the story of the Thompson Twins. So when all's said and done, what did you actually wind up leaving behind versus trying to leave behind?
If I had one word of advice to myself, you can put it that way, it's to get up in the morning and make music. Have fun, but don't take it easy. Challenge yourself all the time. That's what it's about.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate it. Your work is something that I put on for enjoyment to this day and not just as research.
You're very kind. We could talk for many more hours, I'm sure.
You're lucky you got away with just an hour from me, trust me.
All the best now. All
right, that about does it. If you liked what you just heard, please Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe, Gebroe, because this is how I make a living. And stay tuned, because next week we've got the Sopranos' Michael Imperioli rating the Smiths' entire catalog. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Monday, we've got a special early release of our classic sub-show, Queasy Listening. This Monday, it's the jaw-dropping story behind Debbie Boone's You Light Up My Life. And then on Wednesday, the ultimate cut of the Michael Imperioli Smiths episode rolls out for our Patreon's Lieutenant tier. It's the show as it was truly intended to be heard, ad-free and with all the essentials left intact. And then on Friday, the Michael Imperioli free cut comes down the pike, and the rest of you penny pinchers get to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Tom Bailey, Carice Yatter and Hired Gun Media, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into pop-inflected electronic soul music is to leap headfirst into my interview with Phil Manzanera about Roxy Music. That's episode 140. De La Soul, that's episode 82. The Trip to Fantasy Special, that's episode 72. Spiral Stairs rates Roxy Music, episode 58. David Ritz on Marvin Gaye, that's episodes 45, 46, and 47. Jonathan Rado rates Todd Rundgren, that's episodes 37 and 40. Electric Light Orchestra, 34 and 35. Kevin Whelan on Peter Gabriel, that's episode 13. Sly and the Family Stone, that's episodes 5, 6, and 7. Beck, episode 4. And Thompson Twins, episode 3. Join us during the upcoming week. This Sunday, you can expect another deliriously sociopathic entry of Rudy Fishman's Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Get to know your new music-obsessed friends. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, July 19th, we're coming at you with the Sopranos' Michael Imperioli rating the Smiths. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!